In a world that often ignores bad stuff, one woman's life stands a harsh lesson in human cruelty. In fact, her death still not saved her from the exploitation by white people. Her story has even sparked rumors of a Hollywood film starring Beyoncé, showing that she's still a topic of debate today. Beyoncé also mentions her in the song Black Effect, highlighting how her story continues to resonate. But when you say her name, it's with a mix of sadness and deep respect. Who is this woman who went through so much? Who was Sarah Baartman? Born in 1789 near the Gamtoos River in what is now Eastern Cape, South Africa, Sarah was a member of the Khoi community. This indigenous group had a deep-rooted connection to the land, a connection that Sarah would carry in her heart but be torn away from. In her early years, Sarah was steeped in the traditions of her people. Tragically, both her parents died when she was young. By her teenage years, she had married a Khoi man who was a drummer. They had a child together, who unfortunately died shortly after birth. When she was just 16, her husband was murdered by Dutch colonists, adding another layer of sorrow to her already difficult life. As she stepped into her early 20s, her life took a devastating turn. Dutch colonizers who had already imposed their rule over much of South Africa captured Sarah. This was the beginning of a series of life-altering events that would take her thousands of miles away from her homeland, severing her from her roots and subjecting her to a life of dehumanizing exploitation. This is not just a tale of one woman, but a reflection of the time she lived in, where people were reduced to mere curiosities for public display. It's a story that demands to be told, for Sarah and for countless others who suffered similar fates. The life of Sarah Baartman took a harrowing turn when she was bought by a trader named Peter Willem Cesar, who took her to Cape Town. There she became a domestic slave to his brother Hendrik. During her time in domestic servitude in Cape Town, she was mockingly renamed Sergie, a Dutch diminutive for Sarah. Her exploitation reached a new low when Alexander Dunlop, a British physician, crossed her path. Alexander, who was a friend of the Cesar brothers, decided with them that they could use Sarah's body to make money. As a result, he presented her with a contract at 21 years old. This contract falsely promised her a life in England and Ireland, where she would supposedly work as a domestic servant and be exhibited for entertainment. In exchange, she was to receive a portion of the earnings and the freedom to return to South Africa after 5 years. This contract was nothing but a vile ruse. Unable to read, Sarah was tricked into a life of continued enslavement and exploitation. They saw an opportunity for financial gain, capitalizing on Europeans' perverse fascination with Khoi women's bodies. The Khoi people, whom the Dutch disdainfully labeled as Hottentots, had resided in the Cape area for over a millennium. When the Dutch arrived in 1652, they took over the land and forced the Khoi into hard labor. Despite a 1654 law that supposedly protected the Khoi from enslavement, they were still treated horribly. In 1810, Alexander Dunlop discussed with Hendrik Cesar the prospect of taking her to Britain. They departed for London on April 7th, 1810. And just like that, Sarah's life was on the brink of another devastating chapter. Upon setting foot in England, Sarah Baartman was thrust into a life of public humiliation. Her first exhibition took place in the Egyptian Hall at Piccadilly Circus on November 24th, 1810. Marketed as the Hottentot Venus, she was reduced to a spectacle that capitalized on the racial and exotic prejudices of the time. A poster from that period disturbingly described her as a wonderful phenomenon of nature, stripping her of her humanity. The Egyptian Hall, a venue known for its exhibitions, became the stage for this grim display. Dressed in tight, skin-colored garments that highlighted her physique, Baartman was objectified for public amusement. She was paraded around as a freak, her body a subject of invasive curiosity. While in England, Baartman was not just a public spectacle but also a target for so-called scientific inquiry. Anthropologists and scientists subjected her to examinations that were nothing short of degrading. They scrutinized her physical features, labeling them as exotic or unusual, further perpetuating the objectification she endured. Accounts confirm that she was often displayed in minimal clothing and subjected to the prying eyes of the scientific community. Her exploitation was not confined to London. It extended to other parts of England and Ireland, each exhibition compounding the indignities she suffered. The public display of Sarah Baartman didn't go unnoticed. It caught the eyes and hearts of British abolitionists who were appalled by her inhumane treatment. They decided to take action, launching a legal battle that would pit them against her exhibitors, Alexander Dunlop and the Cesar brothers. The courtroom became a stage for a different kind of spectacle, one where Sarah's freedom was the prize. The abolitionists' aim was clear: to liberate Sarah from this degrading life. But the case was far from straightforward. The court was presented with a contract that Sarah had supposedly agreed to, stating her willingness to be exhibited. The fact that she couldn't read English made this contract highly suspect. To make matters worse, Sarah was made to testify. While it's hard to know for sure, some sources suggest she might have been too intimidated to reveal the full extent of her mistreatment. Her words, it was widely believed, were manipulated to fit a narrative that would keep her in a state of captivity. Despite the glaring inconsistencies and the passionate efforts of the abolitionists, the court ruled against Sarah. It was widely believed that her testimony was manipulated, her words twisted to fit a narrative that would keep her in chains, both literal and metaphorical. The failure of this legal battle had an unintended consequence. It only served to heighten the public's fascination with her, far from setting her free. The court's decision made her an even more popular exhibit, drawing larger crowds across England and Ireland. The court case was a missed opportunity for justice, a glaring example of how the legal system itself was complicit in Sarah's ongoing exploitation. It was a dark chapter in a life already filled with unimaginable hardships, and it set the stage for even more trials that Sarah would face in the years to come. In 1814, Sarah Baartman was taken to Paris, a city famous for its culture, but for her, it was another place of suffering. She became popular among the Parisian elite, often seen at high-end places like the Café de Paris, but this attention was a cover for more abuse. She was taken in by a man known as S. Rowe, an animal exhibitor, who led her down a harmful path. It is known that Rowe allowed patrons to abuse her in various ways. Her body also became a subject for unsettling scientific study. She was pressured into what was known as racial science, a field that aimed to categorize her based on her physical traits. However, her life in Paris was cut short. At just 26, Sarah Baartman died. The cause was described as an inflammatory disease, possibly pneumonia, syphilis, or alcohol-related. Yet, even after her death, Sarah Baartman couldn't find peace. Her remains were displayed in a Paris museum, a final indignity that lasted until the late 20th century. It took the intervention of Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president, to finally bring her home. Mandela formally requested the return of Baartman's remains to South Africa, a plea that echoed far beyond diplomatic corridors. France was hesitant, dragging its feet for years before finally agreeing to repatriate her remains. It wasn't until 2002, nearly 2 centuries after she was first taken from her homeland, that Sarah Baartman was finally laid to rest. Her burial took place in Hankey in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, not far from where she was born. This long overdue act was more than a mere formality. It was a somber acknowledgement of the wrongs done to her, a belated attempt at restorative justice. At last, Sarah Baartman could rest in the land that she was taken from, closing a painful chapter that had remained open for far too long. These dark chapters in Sarah Baartman's life served not just as a personal tragedy, but as a harrowing indictment of the societal ills of her time. Racial prejudice, gender exploitation, and the failure of institutions meant to protect human dignity. If you're looking for a space that tackles the hard topics most shy away from, you've come to the right place. If you want to be a part of a community that isn't afraid to face the difficult issues, consider hitting that subscribe button. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we hope to see you again as we continue to explore stories that need to be told.